Good morning and welcome to my presentation. The topic of my paper is Catholics, Protestants, and Education in 19th Century America's Christian Heritage. In my paper, I set forth the idea that if one particular church or religious denomination were to secure taxpayer funding for running a public school in our modern era, we take for granted that this would be unacceptable to the public at large and subsequently come to an abrupt end. This was not always the case in America, even well after the ratification of the Constitution. In my paper, I examine this by way of some of the battles that took place, specifically in regards to education, and more specifically still in reference to Roman Catholics and the attempt of many Protestant groups to suppress them. According to Mark Knoll, he notes that until after the Civil War, most educational programs in the United States, from grade schools through the universities, were modeled on patterns established during the first generations of Puritan settlements. Following the War of 1812, there were two significant changes that would impact American religion as a whole. First, there was the explosion known as the Second Great Awakening. A fantastic resource on this subject is Daniel Walker Howe's Pulitzer Prize winning book, What Hath God Wrought? I highly encourage you to check that out. It's a fantastic historical overview of the period between the War of 1812 all the way up to the Mexican-American War. Pulitzer Prize winning book and a book in this series, Oxford History of the United States. Second, however, was an influx of immigrants during this period, specifically those from Ireland. Irish immigrants were largely Catholic, and this prompted a combination of fears in response. First were the nativist fears. The nativists were those who had been born in America and saw American way of life as being a certain way, and they saw immigration, especially in large numbers, as a threat to this. Second to that was the fact that many of these Irish immigrants were bringing Roman Catholicism with them, which was perceived by many as exactly what their forefathers had run away from in Europe generations earlier. So this came to bear on schools specifically. The common school movement, which is what today we would know as public schools, was really getting its grounding during this time. The idea of taxpayer-funded common schools that everyone could use. But it's important to understand that these were almost entirely Protestant in nature. Their entire foundation, how they were formed, their curriculum was very Protestant themed. Now, this became an issue as Roman Catholics saw the disparity. Many Roman Catholics saw that Protestant-based schools were receiving funding and theirs were not. Roman Catholic schools had no access to public funding, but Protestant-based schools did. As Roman Catholics began asking for these funds and basically noting that this was unfair under the First Amendment, this sparked a great deal of outrage among Protestants who essentially openly admitted that many of their schools were designed to prevent young people from succumbing to ideologies such as that espoused by the Roman Catholic Church. The ultimate result of all of this, which is what makes it very fascinating, is that elected officials came to recognize that the best way to avoid conflict was to defund all religious-based education. This took a long time to implement, but it largely set the stage for what we would have today, which is the idea that no publicly funded schools can teach or advocate any one specific religious belief. So that is a basic summary of my paper, looking at schools and the fights therein, to include the riots that this spurred and even the destruction of churches along the way. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you can offer some commentary. Thank you, and I hope you have a great rest of your class.